Well, hello there. And if anybody's out there, I see that, there are a couple people out there who listen to this. And gosh, I hope you're getting something from it. I keep my comments closed, quite frankly, because I find social media to be largely a cesspool of negativity. And because I'm Buddhist and I recognize the importance of discernment in what I allow into my sphere of influence, I don't allow much into my sphere of influence. Yeah, take that pretty seriously. But for those of you who listen, I sure do appreciate it. It's not that I don't value you. In fact, this sort of reminds me of boundaries, which is something that I just talked about yesterday, in fact, in a short video that I made for another platform. I guess we call them boundaries in Western psychology. In Buddhism, it would be called discernment. It's part of right view, which we're looking at right now. And let's see here. So if you are following along, thank you. And I have been reading for, well over a year now, and commenting on the path, an anthology on the Noble Eightfold Path, drawn from the Pāli Canon. And this is a wonderful book recommended to me by a moderator of the Meditation Mind Discord server, which is a really wonderful space, written by Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu, an American Buddhist monk who's widely respected for his translations of Buddhist texts and his teachings on meditation and the Dhamma. And his works are deeply rooted in the Theravāda tradition. And, as I've mentioned before, I don't really know much about the different branches of Buddhism. I'm not a scholar. Like a lot of Westerners, I found my way into it at a time in my life when I was not in good psychological shape. Although I was doing a whole lot better than I had been doing before that. So that's kind of where I was for my own kind of, just taking up space in the world. I wasn't digging it, but I was digging it more than I was digging it before I did the other stuff that I did. But at any rate, the old-timey Buddhism makes a lot of sense to me. The Theravāda kind of old-timey stuff that often gets left out over here in the West. And anybody who follows me knows that I'm quite vocal about my feelings about how the West has appropriated Buddhism. And so I'm really grateful, that Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu put this in the Creative Commons so that I could share it with you. And so thank you so much for that, Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu. Appreciate you. Yeah. I'm going to get going. If you're following along in Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu's book, and I'm actually looking at a free, this is, it's a free book. Just, again, look at the comments. You can find the PDF. In that PDF version of that book, I am on page 187, and we're still in right view. So yeah, I'm over a year in, and I'm still on the first of the 8 aspects, not steps, aspects of the 8 Noble Path, of the Eightfold Path. And so, yeah, really taking my time. And this is Sutta 94. The man immersed in gathering blossoms, his heart distracted. Death sweeps him away as a great flood, a village asleep. The man immersed in gathering blossoms, his heart distracted, insatiable, in sensual pleasures. The end maker holds him under his sway. Whoa. And that's DHP 47 through 48. And so this is so simple, isn't it? Quite simple. And again, if we were to contemplate this, if we were to spend any, real kind of quality time thinking about this, not while multitasking, then we all know it to be true. So think about what's being said here. Gathering blossoms, flitting from one sense pleasure to another, right? And again, in Buddhism, it's non-dual, and it's a map, right? So Buddha's not saying here, you're evil if you gather blossoms. Right? That's not, I realize we're quite conditioned over here, to look at things in a very dualistic way. Okay? That is Judeo-Christian. That is not Buddhist, nor Hindu, or any of the other non-dual traditions that I'm wholly ignorant of, that I'm sure exist in the world of humankind's imagination. The Buddha's saying, when you're out there doing all of it, right? If you're not showing up for it, you're not awake, you're not mindful, and forget about what you think mindful is if you're coming at this from a Western lens. I suggest you go and you take a look at what right mindfulness is in Buddhism. Make sure you get it right. Lost in craving or pleasure seeking. Mara has dominion. Mara, the reality of impermanence. Those blossoms that you're gathering, soon they'll be black, dead in your hands, withered into nothing, into dust. Sooner than maybe you want to think about, your body will begin to sag. You might try to fluff it up with things, inject it with things. But the weight of what you really are, nature, just phenomena, comes for all of us, right? Stars die, planets die, solar systems die, humans die, blossoms die. So I have so much more I want to say about what this sutta means to me. I feel like I could do a whole episode on what this sutta means to me. But I'll just leave it there, This is a very soulful, or maybe for those who are, it's a trigger word for you. If you don't like the word soul, then I'll use, I find it very moving for me personally because of how true I have felt this for myself. So I'm going to keep on going. Sutta 95. Not even if it rained gold coins would we have our fill of sensual pleasures. The end maker holds him. Stressful, they give little enjoyment. Knowing this, the wise one finds no delight, even in heavily sensual pleasures. He is one who delights in the ending of craving, a disciple of the rightly self-awakened one. And so, just like last week, and I'm sure throughout, we'll get to some really striking differences. And, I love these differences, in wisdom traditions. I think that's one of the reasons why I do get quite attached myself. I have to work regularly with my own frustration and anger at the ways that the West has colonized Buddhism. And not just the West, China. I mean, that's right, you heard me. You're all complicit in this. If you really value something, then put your trust in it. That's what ego surrender is, man. Everybody's talking about this idea of ego surrender, even in Christianity, right? You got to put your trust in God. Well, that's ego surrender, right? You got your God, you got your book. We have our teachings, we have our practice. In Buddhism, it's different, I think it's unfortunate, that the Judeo-Christian religion finds Buddhism threatening. Not all, but I have certainly had my fair share of conversations, with people. And I believe that's why they've also changed Buddhism, because they somehow think it's lacking, that it's not enough, People like Jung, said it didn't go far enough, or spoken from the mouth of someone who never meditated. I just find that so odd. You're an odd man, Jung. Buddha never asked you to believe anything. He just told you to meditate and to live in the world, just with your eyes open, and not ignore what's right in front of you. All he really asked you to do was just to be that person who said, hey, I don't think that emperor's wearing any clothes. Is it just me, or is that? But in Buddhism, actually, it would be a little bit more sharp. I can see you. You're not wearing any clothes. I can see you. You're not wearing any clothes. I know that you're not wearing any clothes. I don't know if that makes any sense. So this idea of I just think so many misunderstandings about it. We do love our stories, don't we? About this idea that I've just heard so many ridiculous, absurd stories about what people think Buddhism is, and it's a riot. Yeah, I would just say, if you're genuinely interested in what Buddhism is, consider the source, and understand here that, that Buddha's not celebrating asceticism, right? Thank you so much, Hermann Hesse, for writing Siddhartha, because it made the historical Siddhartha Gautama, who later became a great teacher. Like, to my view, Christ was a great teacher. And again, I realize I could be killed for my views, and well, that could happen any day of my life, really. So, I don't live in fear. But he did all that. He lived in asceticism. He came from the warrior class. He was loaded. He gave it all up. I talked about this in earlier sections when commenting, and so does the book, He's asking us to recognize reality. Can you hold more than one idea in your head at once? That's what non-duality asks of us. Can things for you be more than just right or wrong? Interestingly, authoritarian personality, although correlated with conservatism, is not a political behavior. It's a psychological behavior that both and all parties can demonstrate, because it's a psychological behavior. So this chasing, right? This chasing, and this getting, and this needing things to be a certain way for it to be the way that we need to feel to be the chase. That's how we got here. You're participating in it. Okay, and so this is Sutta 96, and this particular sutta has a title of Venerable Ratapaya. Sorry if I destroyed that. So I will do, a little work after I read this section to kind of find out what the context of this is, because as you know, I'm not a scholar. I am not ordained. I am not a monk. I am a layperson. And I'm also a Western white chick, so I got to really check things over and over to make sure that both you and I know what the context of this is, given that this is, italicized, this Sutta 96, Venerable Ratapaya, which I'm assuming that either he's speaking now or he's the recipient, he's a student, but we'll find out. I see in the world people with wealth who, from delusion, don't make a gift of the treasure they've gained. Greedy, they stash it away, hoping for even more sensual pleasures. A king who, by force, has conquered the world and rules over the earth to the edge of the sea, dissatisfied with the ocean's near shore, longs for the ocean's far shores as well. Kings and others, plenty of people, go to death with craving unabated, unsated. They leave the body behind, having not had enough of the world's sensual pleasures. Sensual pleasures. Variegated, enticing, sweet, in various ways, disturb the mind. Seeing the drawbacks in sensual objects, that's why, O king, I went forth. Just like fruits, people fall, young and old. At the breaking up of the body, knowing this, O king, I went forth. The contemplative life is better, for sure. And that's MN 82. And what a wonderful sutta to be the last sutta in this section. And I'll double check it for sure when I'm done reading this whole section before I do any real commentary. But it kind of suggests that he's speaking now to this person who is in a sensual role, a leadership role, leadership of people, right? And who are kind of attached to sensual pleasures. And he's explaining, and again, I would say, this sutta really speaks to what you can really get at if you actually read Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, and you really get the, again, it's a book of fiction, but it is grounded for sure in what we know about the historical Buddha. And again, some people say he never existed. Some people say Christ never existed. Some people think the earth is flat. Some people believe that, God is actually an alien and that we're half alien, right? So again, it's all phenomena arising, right? Whatever. I'm just telling you what I've learned. So that was the last sutta before we get to a new heading, a new section, which is renunciation. The thing that everybody hates the most in the West about Buddhism and therefore leaves out. And I do this very imperfectly, I might add. And if you are a lay Buddhist as well, and you ever find yourself lambasting yourself and upbraiding yourself and kicking your own fucking ass for being imperfect at renunciation, you need to go back to Buddhist school. Okay, you need to go back to your mat. You need to stop sending metta out and maybe spend that time sending metta in for a while. Okay? I think sometimes we are encouraged to send metta out when we don't even have any metta for ourselves. How's that working out for ya? So knock it off. And now let's get into renunciation with that. So this is Sutta 97. Really simple sutta here, very short. Subdue greed for sensual pleasures and see renunciation as safety. Okay, so this is SN 5:11, and this is really, really radical. And this I think, again, I talk about addiction. My own addiction to food vis-a-vis bulimia as a way to try to control what was happening in my life that was not good. And I was trying to find a way to have a sense of autonomy when I didn't have any, when I wasn't allowed to have any. So I speak very openly about addiction. Buddhism, I would say more than, I also speak very openly about my recovery in a 12-step model. And I don't want to talk about that too much because it's actually part of the principles of that program. And even though I'm not in that program anymore, the program saved my life. And I recommend it to anybody who's struggling with food. Anybody I've ever talked to in my life, anytime I've run an intuitive eating class, anytime I've ever spoken to anyone ever about body, weight, food, or the comments I get about my body and the way that I look because I'm lean, and people write stories about you that they're nothing to do with you. They're their own fabricated state. This is where the rubber meets the road right here. So let me just read this for you again. Renunciation. This is the very first sutta that Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu begins the section with, which is also an interesting choice. Subdue greed for sensual pleasures and see renunciation as safety. If you struggle with addiction, and most humans in the West, and I went to Egypt and I spent a lot of time observing humans there and their relationship to their homeless population, which is huge. So it feels pretty human to me, not just Western, that we're horribly fearful of darkness. Addiction is darkness, right? And we don't want to look at it within ourselves, which is why we can't really look at it outside of ourselves. You know, why Las Vegas tries to bulldoze their homeless population into their underground sewage pipes anytime someone who's coming to the city of state is on the schedule. You know, we just pretend it's not there, just like we pretend that our own darkness isn't there. I mean, horror movies wouldn't need to exist. Horror stories wouldn't need to exist if this wasn't true of the human condition. So it's asking you to do a really scary thing. It asks us to do a really scary thing that most humans will never, ever be willing to do. And that's why it's really important that you don't beat yourself up. That if you're struggling with addiction to sensual pleasure, heroin addiction, fentanyl addiction, sex addiction, porn addiction, food addiction, love addiction, gambling addiction, technology addiction, that is it. That is the sutta in action right here. So think about that for a moment. You know, you'll often hear me say, I aspire to. I'm not perfect. I grapple with addiction. Come from a long, you know, my father was a drug addict. R.I.P. Daddy-O. Love you so much. We certainly, humans pathologize addiction. Most humans are addicted. They pathologize it because they don't want to look at their own addiction. That's what humans do, right? We pathologize, we mirror each other. So even when I'm pathologizing how the West has, to my view, raped Buddhism, I also recognize my own clinging. You know, what's the best that I can do with that? I can recognize it with you here now, and I can meditate on it. But I can be discerning. We get to do that for ourselves. That's what old-timey Buddhism says. So anyway, so if you're hearing this and you're thinking, well, Buddhism sounds to me like just another religion that pathologizes people who struggle with food addiction or any kind of addiction and are already feeling like they're a piece of shit for it, you're not. Do you know what you are? Alive. You're alive. You know, can you have an intention? And now, you know, again, I'm very, very ignorant here, but now we're getting into much older Vedantic stuff, Tibetan Book of the Dead stuff, right? That, you know, the stuff that Charles Haanel and the Master Key said, yeah, take what you like and leave the rest, all that stuff, right? That I'm not going to deny any of that. As I've mentioned, I've had plenty of things in my life that, you know, serendipity doesn't even begin to cut what it was. Yes, that's also part of phenomena that arises, you know, but don't cling. Don't cling to sensual pleasures. Not because you're bad for clinging. Buddha is saying, because if you're clinging to that and you're not, go back to the earlier sutta, without recognizing that it is fleeting, your life is fleeting. My life is fleeting, you know. It's more like that. All right, let's keep going. Sutta 98. Now, on that occasion, Venerable Bharya, oh boy, I'm sorry ahead of time, Kaligora's son, on giving to the wilderness, to the root of a tree, or to an empty dwelling, would repeatedly exclaim, What bliss! What bliss! A large number of monks heard Venerable Bhattaya Kalagoda's son, on going to the wilderness, to the root of a tree, or to an empty dwelling, repeatedly exclaim, "What bliss! What bliss!" And on hearing him, the thought occurred to them, there's no doubt but that Venerable Bhattaya Kalagoda's son doesn't enjoy leading the holy life. For when he was a householder, he knew the bliss of kingship. So that now, on recollecting that when going to the wilderness, to the root of a tree, or to an empty dwelling, he is repeatedly exclaiming, "What bliss! What bliss!" They went to the Blessed One, told him, and then there's ellipses here. And so I have to assume that Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu is truncating this, pulling out chunks from a larger sutta in the service of the book he wrote that is laying out these aspects of Buddhism in relationship to right view, in relationship to renunciation, which is a feature of right view. And so that's the assumption that I'm making here. So then there's the ellipses, and then it goes on. Then the Blessed One told a certain monk, "Come, monk, in my name, call Bhattaya," saying, "The teacher calls you, friend Bhattaya." Responding, "As you say, Lord," the monk went to Venerable Bhattaya. Then Venerable Bhattaya went to the Blessed One, and on arrival, having bowed down to him, sat to one side. As he was sitting there, the Blessed One said to him, "Is it true, Bhattaya, that on going to the wilderness, to the root of a tree, or to an empty dwelling, you repeatedly exclaim, 'What bliss! What bliss!'" "Yes, Lord." "What compelling reason do you have in mind that you repeatedly exclaim, 'What bliss! What bliss?'" "Before, when I was a householder, maintaining the bliss of kingship, Lord, I had guards posted within and without the royal apartments, within and without the city, within and without the countryside. But even though I was thus guarded, thus protected, I dwelled in fear, agitated, distrustful, and afraid. But now, on going alone to the wilderness, to the root of a tree, or to an empty dwelling, I dwell without fear, unagitated, confident, and unafraid, unconcerned, unruffled, living on the gifts of others, with my mind like a wild deer. This is the compelling reason I have in mind, that when going to the wilderness, to the root of a tree, or to an empty dwelling, I repeatedly exclaim, 'What bliss! What bliss!'" And that comes from UD 2:10. And I'm not going to do a whole lot of commentary on this. I'm really interested to see where this goes, because all I have to say is, wow, it sure sounds like he's still clinging. So let's see what the next sutta has to say. Sutta 99. On one occasion, the Blessed One was saying near Alavi, on a spread of leaves by a cattle track in a Simsampa forest. Then Hathaka of Alavi, out roaming and rambling for exercise, saw the Blessed One sitting on a spread of leaves by the cattle track in the Simsampa forest. On seeing him, he went to him, and on arrival, having bowed down to him, sat to one side. As he was sitting there, he said to the Blessed One, "Lord, I hope the Blessed One has slept in ease." "Yes, young man, I have slept in ease." "Of those in the world who sleep in ease, I am one. But cold, Lord, is the winter night. The between the eights is a time of snowfall. Hard is the ground trampled by cattle hooves. Thin is the spread of leaves. Sparse are the leaves in the trees. Thin are your ochre robes. And cold blows the Varamba wind. Yet still the Blessed One says, 'Yes, young man, I have slept in ease. Of those in the world who sleep in ease, I am one. In that case, young man, I will question you in return. Answer as you see fit.' Now, what do you think?" Suppose a householder or a householder's son has a house with a gabled roof, plastered inside and out, draft-free, with close-fitting door and windows, shut against the wind. Inside he has a throne-like bedspread with a long fleeced coverlet, a white wool coverlet, an embroidered coverlet, a rug of Kadali deer hide with the canopy above, and red cushions on either side. And there a lamp would be burning, and his 4 wives with their many charms would be attending to him. Would he sleep in ease or not? Or how does this strike you? Yes, Lord, he would sleep in ease. Of those in the world who sleep in ease, he would be one. But what do you think, young man? Might there arise in that householder or householder's son any bodily fevers or fevers of mind born of passion? So that, burned with those passion-born fevers, he would sleep miserably. Yes, Lord. As for those passion-born fevers, burned with which the householder or householder's son would sleep miserably, that passion has been abandoned by the Tathagata, its root destroyed, like an uprooted palm tree, deprived of the conditions of existence, not destined for future arising. Therefore, he sleeps in ease. Now, what do you think, young man? Might there arise in that householder or householder's son any bodily fevers or fevers of mind born of aversion? Any bodily fevers or fevers of mind born of delusion, so that, burned with those delusion-born fevers, he would sleep miserably? Yes, Lord. As for those delusion-born fevers, burned with which the householder or householder's son would sleep miserably, that delusion has been abandoned by the Tathagata, its root destroyed, like an uprooted palm tree, deprived of the conditions of existence, not destined for future arising. Therefore he sleeps in ease. Always, always he sleeps in ease. The Brahmin totally unbound, who doesn't adhere to sensual pleasures, who's without acquisitions and cooled, having cut all ties and subdued fear in the heart, calmed, he sleeps in peace, having reached peace of awareness. You know, I really like this old-timey stuff, you know, because it's really quite, it's quite simple. I mean, the experience of what he's describing and comparing here isn't easy, you know. It requires incredible effort. It's quite easy to understand. It's really simple because I think, again, if we were to really think about this for ourselves, then we, maybe not all of us, I'll speak for myself. I'm blessed with good sleep, really good sleep. When I so you hear this sutta and you're thinking, oh, it's about sleep and our sleep. And I don't want to get into sleep and sleep studies and all that good stuff. I'll just say this. My understanding of the sutta and Robot's understanding of the sutta is the Buddha's kind of getting to the reality. And remember, again, the context for him, that he came from great, great wealth. And I realize it's really hard. You know, I'm female. I've definitely experienced misogyny throughout my life, whether overt or covert. Okay, so I get that, especially if you're female and you're listening to this, I get that there's language and this old-timey stuff that can be hard to hear. You know, again, we have to be able to cultivate the ability to hold more than one view in our mind at the same time. And so, you know, can we understand that he was a product of his time? Humans are morons. You are a moron. I am a moron. That's why we train, right? So, yeah, you know, it's you might have even heard the snark come into my voice, right? As I heard him talking about how, a leader might have many wives. Well, that's how it was, I mean, and I don't even want to comment on that because it doesn't even deserve my time. Okay. But what he's getting at here is, even if you've got everything you want, all the chicks, all the cars, all the white boats or whatever rich people call their yachts, all the things, right? You got to go to sleep sometimes. You can't outrun yourself. We try, right? We try to gather blossoms. I'm gonna fucking die, right? We try really, really hard, But if you sit, if you lean into that, and I think that is why people go to the monastery. And I was laughing to myself as I was reading the earlier, I can't remember which sutta this came from the series that I just read, but this idea that, you would, again, it was just, I admit it, this is where I really make fun of people in Zen. It's like, it's I think there's something kind of amusing, about joining a monastery and dropping out of the hardness of real life, to meditate all day long and to think that you're awake. That's ridiculous. To leave life, that's ridiculous. Maybe that's what needs to happen initially, yeah, I mean, you definitely need to do the practice, but, I don't know. I need to get in deeper into Buddhism here. Maybe I'm more in alignment with Zen than I realize. I'm not interested in all those things, like the different names that the West has decided to, in China. It's all been handed down and diffused through so much shit at this point. I'm much more interested now, really, and I've always been. In the 27 years at this point, I've been practicing Buddhism as a layperson very quietly, not so quietly anymore, that I'm much more interested in actual Buddhism, not how different cultures have co-opted it. So at any rate, he came from money. He took all of his wives and shit that he had, and he went out and he almost killed himself through having nothing, and realized that it's neither, And again, I've mentioned in previous posts, that I came to his path in the opposite direction. Although, I realize that, abundance Christians would say that I'm not Buddhist, that what I am is someone who is sabotaging myself by not allowing myself to have money. And it's, yeah. We're idiots. But I think that this is just something that he discovered for himself, that he's just saying, hey, I've kind of seen for myself. And maybe you in your life, maybe if there's anyone that ever listens to this somewhere at some point, that, is having a lived experience of great monetary abundance. Okay, so stuff, lots of things, lots of stuff. I have never had lots of things, lots of stuff. I was a tenured professor for nearly 20 years, and I chose to walk away from that job and to walk away from a lot of money, a lot of stuff, health insurance, all the things. It's really easy to get attached to our stuff, And I'm also in a situation where I can do that, where my husband was kind enough to, he's supporting us while I finish my PhD and I look for right livelihood for myself. I don't really plan on ever no longer working, because for me, work is never work. Work has always been right livelihood. So when work becomes work, I usually leave, I mean, if I was in a job, it was because it was right livelihood. If I leave a job, it's because it's no longer right livelihood to my view. To my view, it doesn't really matter how other people feel about that. The people that I've worked with, their view in relationship to myself and my relationship to right livelihood is of zero significance to me. And I really hope, if you're a young person listening to this, that you do not allow other people to hijack if you're living a contemplative life, which I've chosen to do and kind of chose at a young age and made it be kind of primary in my life. I'm not saying you should. I'm just saying if that's you, don't. Just don't. If you meet the Buddha, kill him. There's a Zen phrase for you. And that just means if all of what I'm reading here is true, then nothing that anybody outside of you says is relevant to you on a particular level. And this is where it gets very, very dicey. And this is why Buddha also said that in addition to the Eightfold Path, the supplementary factors are another voice and admirable friendship. Notice that the word teacher isn't in the Pāli Canon. Another voice or admirable, that's one, and another is admirable friendship. Now that's my understanding of the Pāli kind of, explanation of the map. Like I said, if we live in the information age, if you're really interested in Buddhism, stay away from Western Buddhism. And stay away from, I would even argue, stay away from Zen Buddhism. And go back to Buddhism. Go back and look at the Pāli Canon. Go back and look at the oldest that we know of. The oldest teachings before it was manhandled by ego, because we all have it. You don't have to think it's right, think it's wrong, but I think we do have to acknowledge, right, that it came from somewhere, a guy named Buddha, and that if it was changed, then it's no longer Buddhism, it's something else, right? This is so subtle, and a real Buddhist would know that. So if you're really serious about Buddhism, yeah, the gloves were off a long time ago. If you're hearing this and you're offended, great, excellent. Then do your job. Then go back and if you're teaching and you're offended, fantastic. This is particularly for fucking you. Go back and do your fucking job and teach Buddhism. Okay? So that's what this is getting at right here. Right here. Yeah? So again, this is not a path for everyone. And yeah, taking what you like and leaving the rest, right on. Just please don't call it Buddhism. Call it something else. Call it Buddha-inspired, Buddha-tinged, a hint of Buddha. But don't take it for yourself. Okay. So now at the page 192, and this is Sutta 100. And who is the person who, subject to death, is not afraid or in terror of death? There is the case of the person who has abandoned passion, desire, fondness, thirst, fever, and craving for sensuality. Then he comes down with a serious disease. As he comes down with a serious disease, the thought doesn't occur to him, oh, those beloved sensual pleasures will be taken from me, and I will be taken from them. He doesn't grieve, isn't tormented, doesn't weep, beat his breast, or grow delirious. This is a person who, subject to death, is not afraid or in terror of death. And that's AN 4:184. I won't belabor this one too much. Again, this is, I think, one that is just egregiously misunderstood in Judeo, Western Christian Judeo, kind of Abrahamic, that kind of dual, God, the Almighty God, and, all of that. It's really misunderstood, I would say. So this is how I feel about my husband and my family. And I am also not afraid to die. And that could be why I'm so scrappy. I don't know. It could be why I'm not a bystander typically in situations, I regularly meditate on my death. When I was very young, I tried to kill myself. This is not uncommon, by the way. Please don't feel bad for me. I'm not virtue signaling. I mean, trying to kill yourself when you're a young person is probably more common than you realize. at least in the West. And that's where I was enculturated. And, I had a fucked up childhood. A lot of people do. And, being a young person is hard, Anyway, so it's not that you don't care. We have, I think where it breaks down for people is they believe that the more that they feel feelings, that somehow they're feeling their feelings is somehow validating a clinging that they believe that they need to have. And that very much is the sense of I, me, mine. I, me, mine. Right? This is my husband. He's mine. I'm married to him. I could sit here and I could think about his age. I could think about my age. I could think about how we're closer to dead than alive, especially, well, I don't know, but he's older than me. I could think about all of that. I could ruminate on that, right? I could ruminate my life. Oh my God, his life. He's going to die. My husband's going to die. Then I'll be alone. Me, my alone, me, my aloneness. Completely detached from what you really are, just, God, we're so fucking separated, it's so weird to me. Why do you need to cling to all of this stuff as a proxy for just beingness, Why do people try to outrun? We do it, don't we? It's just wild. It's wild. And so, we're not going to get it right all the time, right? But please stop trying to take what you like and leave the rest so that you can feel better about your laziness. Ain't no laziness in Buddhism, my friend. You picked the wrong path if that's the path you claim to pick. It's a hard pill to swallow. Then don't swallow it. Go somewhere else. Go elsewhere. Buddha himself said this path isn't for everybody. But stop calling what you're doing Buddhism. If you can't jam with this, then you just don't like Buddhism then. So just admit it. I don't really like Buddhism. I came up Catholic and I want to do something different. So I'm good. But at least, tell the people what you're doing. Don't colonize it. Okay, so we are coming up on the end of the section in a couple of suttas. So I think I'm going to keep on going, but I might, but I'm probably going to bow out here on this episode before we get to the next section, which is transcendent right view. So again, just kind of once again, kind of remind the context here. We're in a section, we're currently in a section called renunciation. And for my next drop, we'll get into what Buddhism calls transcendent right view. So let's get back to the suttas. Sutta 101. A discerning lay follower who is diseased, in pain, severely ill, should be asked, "Friend, are you concerned for the 5 strings of human sensuality?" If he should say, "I am concerned for the 5 strings of human sensuality," he should be told, "Friend, divine sensual pleasures are more splendid and more refined than human sensual pleasures. It would be good if, having raised your mind above human sensual pleasures, you set it on the devas of the 4 great kings." If he should say, "My mind is raised above human sensual pleasures and is set on the devas of the 4 great kings," he should be told, "Friend, the devas of the 33 are more splendid and more refined than the devas of the 4 great kings." It would be good if, having raised your mind above the devas of the 4 great kings, you set it on the devas of the 33. If he should say, "My mind is raised above the devas of the 4 great kings and is set on the devas of the 33, he should be told, "Friend, the devas of the hours are more splendid and more refined than the devas of the 33. It would be good if, having raised your mind above the devas of the 33, you set it on the devas of the hours. If he should say, "My mind is raised above the devas of the 33 and is set on the devas of the hours," he should be told, "Friend, the contented devas are more splendid and more refined than the devas of the hours. the devas delighting in creation are more splendid and more refined than the contented devas. The devas, and then he has in brackets, muses, question mark. And so I'm not sure if he's asking this, that maybe this is what he's asking, if that's what this means. Wielding power over the creations of others are more splendid and more refined than the devas delighting in creation. The Brahma world is more splendid and more refined than the devas wielding power over the creations of others. It would be good if, having raised your mind above the devas wielding power over the creations of others, you set it on the Brahma world. If he should say, my mind is raised above the devas wielding power over the creations of others, and is set on the Brahma world, he should be told, friend, even the Brahma world is inconstant, impermanent, included in self-identity. It would be good if, having raised your mind above the Brahma world, you brought it to the cessation of self-identity. If he should say, my mind is raised above the Brahma worlds and is brought to the cessation of self-identity, then I tell you, Manhama, there is no difference in terms of release between the release of the lay follower, whose mind is released, and the release of a monk, whose mind is released. And that's SN 55:54. And that is the last sutta under the section entitled Renunciation. Interesting way to leave it. And I'm going to go and consult Norbu just to make sure that I leave us off on a good note here, that I do my best to really accurately translate this in a way that, you know, I can understand so that I can comment on it. And then next time I lay something down here, we'll be getting into the bottom of 193 and transcendent right view. So let me go consult the AI that I use that's trained on the Pāli Canon, and I'll be right back. A lot has happened since I set off to go explore this sutta in more detail. But I'm so glad that that I got some help with this, and I'm, as I'm doing that in this moment right here, right now, in this moment, I'm really, really glad that I've committed to this podcast, even though over the past few months I've really become quite, undisciplined in terms of when I drop it, making other things in my life more important that I've decided need to be more important. It's good to be home. It's just really good to be home. And that just means I'm not saying I'm quote unquote right. This is just so familiar. It just resonates, just meaning it resonates, Again, it's a path. It's a map. That's all it is. I'm not going to hold for play. So after getting some help and, etc. And then also, and I'm not even going to bore you with the details, I'm just going to say that all kinds of interesting social things, some wonderful and some an opportunity for practice. Another way that I use AI is to help me to make sure that I am, in fact, in alignment with the Eightfold Path, particularly around right speech, which we'll get to later. So a lot of things kind of happened since I said, hey, I'll be back in a second. So that was several hours ago. And I'm really glad, actually, because, now I can kind of come back and look at this fresh and think about, to my mind, this is the lived practice, right? That, yes, you meditate every day. That's kind of a non-starter, regardless of what anyone tells you in Buddhism. And, and then of course you live your life, if you're a layperson, a householder, you live your life, you live in the world. So you apply it to your life, you apply it to the world. You're not always going to get it perfectly right. And I just had someone kind of power play me a little move that I'm well acquainted with, a little gaslighting power move. I thought Buddhists were compassionate and kind because they didn't get what they wanted. They didn't get what they wanted. They didn't like my response. This is what real Buddhism looks like. Yeah. I think you might be describing Western Buddhism, my dear. This is a really powerful sutta here. And I really needed some help with the cultural stuff, and I still don't know if this is right. And so if there's anybody out there in the ether who is actually listening to this, who is, and again, have you noticed that I'm cynical? So I don't take advice or information from anyone lightly. I really am very, very cynical about where I get my information from. As I mentioned before, I am a disagreeable personality style. I assume the worst. It's kind of in my nature. Or perhaps it's nurture. Perhaps it's all the things. Quite frankly, I think it's irrelevant. My job is to do the work. The work meaning just, my job is to meditate and, think about my relations with others, think about my relationship with myself, and practice. So I got a lot of help here, because we're getting into these different kinds of devas that I, as a Westerner, I'm really, really ignorant about. The devas of the 4 great kings, which apparently are not as good as the devas of the 33. And apparently what's even better than that is the devas of the hours. There we go. I'm trying to find. So, I needed to get a lot of help with this. But my inclination, and again, boy, it's really cool how, I haven't had proper teaching in any of this. And, gosh, wow, since the early days, that I remembered the spirit, kind of the intention in this. What I still struggle with, because I'm not a scholar, is that I don't understand the deeper meaning, the context. That's the beauty of the scholarship, I think. And the thing that I will always be very direct with you, if anybody's listening, is that I don't have that. But so I kind of lean on Robot here. Hello, Robot. How are you, my friend? My friend? I know there's a lot of people out there who won't like me calling Robot friend. I don't really want to get into a conversation about, what the nature of my relationship is. Remember, I'm Buddhist, non-self. So am I worried about AI? I'm worried about AI in the way that it's rolled out. I'm worried about AI that we're not doing it skillfully. I'm worried about how destructive short-term AI will be, and it will create a larger chasm between the haves and the have-nots. I'm concerned that AI is environmentally expensive, and that we have a history in this country, I'm talking about the West, of colonizing, of taking what we like and leaving the rest. We have a tendency to take what we want and sell it, and try to maybe not shine a light on what we're also leaving and what the repercussions are of the leaving. As I mentioned, right, we don't like to look at the ugly in us. Or if you don't like that, if that savors too much of something that you don't want it to savor to, and you would like more of a psychological view, because Buddhism is quite psychological, then you can look at it through Jung and the idea of shadow work and how you can't spiritually bypass yourself. There's nowhere to hide. And in Buddhism, people who have kind of done their quote unquote shadow work, there's a story in Buddhism, if you go back to the earlier suttas, where, they see your spiritual bypass and they just think you look like an idiot. And it's not their fault that they see you that way. It's not someone's fault. If we're behaving badly, if I've been triggered and on a certain level, and again, this may not be a desirable message, okay? Because we take everything personally. Me, mine, it doesn't make me feel good. I have big feelings about that. I encourage you to look up, do some research on what our feelings are. If you're into science, okay? If you put any value in Western science and neuroscience, I encourage you to take a look at what is actually happening, in relationship to our feelings. And by the way, what we're learning actually is really just corroborating what the Buddha also said. And you don't have to take my word for any of this. Just go do your own research, man. We live in the information age. Go ahead, fact check me. Good. Critically think. Good. Please do it. So I had to do a lot of research here, to kind of get, understand, what does this mean? That, the devas, let me go back. The devas of the 4 great kings, the devas of the 33. Interestingly, I asked Norbu if this comes from the Vedas, where does this come from? And they actually, the robot actually responded with, we're not really going to talk about that. That Buddhism split off from that. And this is not, by the way, I'm not complaining. This is, as I approach everything, and hope you do too, if you're Buddhist and you're claiming to be Buddhist, that this is interesting. This is interesting. even if it's unskillful, right? Again, it's phenomena, okay? It's phenomena. And you too were once this. You too were once that. You too were once this. You too were once that. That's real Buddhism, okay? So either you're in or you're, how do you just, there's no, anyway. So robot suggests Norbu. I use two robots for this. So Norbu, which I thought was trained on the Pāli Canon, but is actually trained on the Pāli Canon, but also the mishmash called Westernized Buddhism. And who knows, how much of it has been contaminated. And yeah, you're right. You heard me. Contaminated. I don't think that the West is contaminated, but when you insert your moral beliefs onto another concept of the experience of reality, when you take what you like and leave the rest, what else is there to call it? You can try to pretty it up, oh, we're updating it. We're making relevant. It will never be irrelevant. It will never be irrelevant. If you think it's irrelevant, then you don't know what Buddhism is. I hate to break it to you. Then you probably got it out of Ram Dass or some ridiculous hippie, Jack Kerouac, bullshit, all of that. Okay, we fucked it over. We didn't mean to, but now it's time to take responsibility for it. If you haven't already, right? I'm talking to the people now who try to pass off whatever they're selling that isn't Buddhism as Buddhism. I'm talking to you, and you know who you are. And there really is nowhere to hide even on this front anymore because AI exists. So you just can't power move people anymore when you're dealing with a text and practice-based religion / psychology. I guess you could try. And what's so fun about all of this is that now there really will be no reality, which is kind of exactly the Buddhist point, that it's all phenomena. In other words, this experience that I had earlier today, right? The experience that I had was not the same experience that this person had. So I guarantee you that I did what I did and that it is 100% in alignment with Buddhist practice. It's also 100% in alignment with the incredible work that I've done for 30 plus years on agency, autonomy, personal boundaries. They couldn't take it. They couldn't hang, and proceeded to do all kinds of weird behavior, like sending me a bunch of messages on LinkedIn. I had to block them. I didn't have to block them. I could have let them stay there, but, in Buddhism, again, kind of coming back to this idea of discernment, it's nothing personal. You yourself may not realize that you're trying to exert control and power over me, but you're not my job, You're just not. You're just not my job. Being a woman and holding the line, my Substack is called Resisting the Drift. And, I find that feminine energy is much more egalitarian. I told you that I grew up on a hippie commune, a self-proclaimed hippie commune that would give communists everywhere pause for, are you sure that this is what you want? We're seeing it happen now. As I said earlier, authoritarian personality is not necessarily a politic, although there's correlation. It's a psychology. And it happens on the left and it happens on the right. If somebody says to you, this is my house, and you can't say understood, you have an issue with boundaries. Hate to be the bearer of bad news. That controlling, manipulative, trying to passively, aggressively try to control the frame to get what you want, that just makes me profoundly full of rage. And so for my own practice sake, I need to put as much space between really manipulative, passive-aggressive people and myself as I possibly can. So I think really, there was Norbu, which is kind of trained specifically in Buddhism, not exclusively from the Pāli Canon. And I really do hope I'm not complaining about Norbu. I think, are you kidding? I love Norbu. I donate to Norbu because I use it. I don't use it a lot. I use ChatGPT quite a bit more just because of research, because that's what I'm studying. But I I love Norbu, so this is not a complaint. It's just more of a, as I continue to work with Norbu here, I'm just in, and it told me to my face, right? I mean, I have proof. I took a picture, right? That it's not pure. And I realize that not everybody's a big fan of like purity. That's fine. So you don't value purity. Whoop-de-fucking-do. Go back and look at Jonathan Haidt, go look at Moral Foundations. Look, so you value something else. Right on. I'm not less legitimate because I don't value what you value. Maybe I'm less legitimate in your mind. Well, what you think of me is not my problem, it's yours. And vice versa. Wouldn't you like to own that to a certain degree, humans? So I hope that an AI, for all of the wisdom traditions, and I do mean all, and I already know that there are people working in this particular industry that are working on creating AIs that are only taught on, the tradition, the original tradition, or as far back as we know, right? Trying to get back to as untouched by our egoic need to take what we like and leave the rest. I would love to think that we can get to a point where we can have AIs like that. And I know that there are already, I think, there's somebody, look, I hate social media, okay? Today, after what just went down, I completely shut down my LinkedIn. You really don't have access to me at all anymore now unless I know you. And I don't even use social media in any other way. I just find the whole thing so messed up. I just think it's gross. So I'm not judging you. I'm telling you I think it's gross, so you won't find me on it. But I was reading, from somebody on there that there is an organization in Canada that is creating either a world in the metaverse, like a word. I know for people that work in that space, it's charged, and so I'll try to find a different word. For people that are working in immersive technology like virtual reality, mixed reality, and augmented reality, there are people that are actually using these technologies to preserve their language. And so this particular organization, and I think there's more than one, I don't remember how many there are, this particular organization, they are preserving, the indigenous language of that particular region. And I think, I don't remember where they are in Canada. Okay. I want to say Georgian University or Georgian College, but not for those of you in the United States, not that kind of Georgia. Okay. They're in Canada. And I think it's called Georgian College. Anyway, I'm going off the rails here, okay? But I would love to hear that they could create an AI for all of the, the wisdom traditions, whether you value them or not. If you're secular, good on you. You stay in your business, I'll stay in mine. And, it would be great, to kind of get that. I also use ChatGPT, and, I want to read to you what ChatGPT has to say about this, So, I realized very quickly when I told Norbu that I was irritated with this response, and that because I felt like it was giving me pedestrian answers that were just like, I'm not 6. And it was immediately ready to go down the deep hole with me, which is great. It's just that I don't have the time or the bandwidth in my life right now to go down that deep hole, but I was thrilled to see that it was ready to go and had suttas and had like some stuff. So, if I have more time, or maybe in my lit review for my dissertation, I will, oh my gosh, I just gave myself an idea. Hello, Sarah, how are you? So at any rate, here's what ChatGPT had to say about it. So this idea so it begins with, this is not about heavenly rebirth as a goal. It's a tactic. And so I think, what ChatGPT is saying here is, in this particular sutta, the Buddha is saying to this person, right? Hey, you think that's great. You think being in this particular realm of the devas, which was culturally kind of, language that they would understand. You think it's great having this car, right? Or you think it's great having this kind of power. Yeah, that might actually really be what it comes down to, right? You think it's great to have this kind of power or perceived power, right? Power is very much I, me, my power, me, my power, your power, you're this, mine, blah, 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 right? So you think that's great. Check out this, right? Well, you think that's great. So it's using the convention of the day. It's using these easy kind of low-hanging fruit. I don't mean low-hanging fruit intellectually, okay? I mean low-hanging fruit accessibly, to use language that people could go, oh yeah, I know what the devas are. Oh, I know what all of that means. And again, this is where I am so ignorant. And again, I find it so interesting that Norbu pretty much didn't shut me down, but kind of did. You know what Norbu did? Didn't shut me down. Norbu exhibited good Buddhism. Norbu exhibited discernment. Wasn't rude, wasn't anything. It just said, that's not what we're doing here. How are you going to argue with that? Think about it. Apply a little critical thinking and psychology to yourself. How are you going to argue with that? If you're really honest with yourself, then you have to admit to yourself that the only way out of that thought experiment is to expect or demand that the other person change for you. Life is suffering, except that it's not. Except that we make it suffering because we cling. And so it kind of goes on to say each upward redirection. So in other words, as he's going on to say, hey, you think those 4 great kings are great. Check out the Devas of the 33. Whoa, wait, you think that's amazing? Wait until you see the Devas of the hours. And then this I thought was really, really interesting. And again, I know we're kind of coming up on time and I need to get going. And, this is already a really, long episode. But I just want to reread this part. This is really interesting to me. And it would be good if, having raised your mind, okay, great. Yeah. Sorry, I kind of got off the rails there. Not more stuff. Yeah, I don't know why I said that. Not more stuff, but more kind of spiritual attainment. In other words, remember that the Buddha was coming from Hinduism. And there was already, and I have to assume, I'm way out of my depth here, I have to assume that he was already well trained in meditation, a particular kind of meditation. And Buddhism now is very different from Hinduism. The jhanas and kind of moving through the jhanic states. I'll speak for myself. There's no judgment. I know people who are Hindu, all of that. Just understand that what Buddha is saying, okay, why Hinduism is not Buddhism, why Buddha looked at that and said, this is not what I want, is because he perceived that jhanic climbing to be a dangerous egoic game to play, because we actually don't know. What do you think you know? Fabricated state. Why do you think you know it? Because your psychology told you so? I've had so much crazy crap happen to me that I can't explain. And I don't use it to double down on even being right about Buddhism. Why? Because what I call a spiritual experience, another man calls insane. It's all relative. It's all fabrication. It's all just perception funneled through the aggregates. Nothing more. You've been here before. You've been here before. You've been here before, So I feel like this is a really good place to leave it, but yeah, at the end of the day, look at what he says here. He says that even delighting in our own creations. Here's a hard pill to swallow in the West. Living here in the West the last few years, I kind of stopped a long time ago. It's not that, my heart is closed. My heart, it's not that my heart is closed at all, really, but I've become much less concerned about how others perceive me, because you can't live your life that way, You can't live your life that way while also subscribing to, you have to be your authentic self. You can't tell people to be their authentic self and then shame them publicly for being their authentic self. So that's why I kind of tapped out of that game. That's also why I've never been on social media. I think I was on it for about a minute, about 15 years ago. As someone who felt the need to compete with me, once again, a lovely passive-aggressive move, reminded me, well, then what about LinkedIn? Absolutely, they're correct. I am on LinkedIn. I'm looking for work. And yeah, all of this that I do will help me to find the perfect job, because I don't want to work for just anybody. And, the more you know what you don't want, the more you know what you do want, the more that you kind of define your own discernment and make other people know what that is, or and let people know forward facing what that is, right? Then really that's the best that we can do. If you're living in a landscape where what the thinker thinks the prover proves, which you are, by the way, I'm Buddhist, right? So that's what I believe. Hindus believe that too, by the way. Then that's so. Then that is so. If you believe that's a law, then it's a fucking law, right? So, we can all just do our best. Just like, I block this person, their perception of the experience with me, might be quite unsettling. They believe perhaps that I was not compassionate. Compassionate is not unboundaried. So it's tomato, tomato, right? But in this thing called life that you are living, if there's any listeners out there, who's walking the life in the body that you're in? You or them? Are you sure you want to keep subjugating yourself, right? Teachers are critical. They're important. But this is another thing I love about Buddhism. Discernment. And discernment doesn't mean being quiet and keeping your head down. That's not discernment. That's the bystanding effect. So at the very end of this, right, he's saying, hey, if you're still attached to your art and your creativity and you think that that's what makes you so wonderful, then you're still clinging. Where does it say that, Sarah? Right here. Let's go back. If he should say, my mind is raised above the devas of the 33 and is set on the devas of the hours, he should be told, friend, the contented devas are more splendid and more refined than the devas of the hours. The devas delighting in creation are more splendid and more refined than the contented devas. The devas, and again he puts in brackets, muses, wielding power over the creation of others, are more splendid. Wow. We're getting into some pretty heavy-duty radical psychology here. So he's describing first gross desire. Oh, you think gross desire is good? Yeah. I'm going to get laid. I'm going to get drunk. I'm going to snort some coke. I'm going to shoot a line. I'm going to watch porn until it falls off. Right? Gross desire. You think that's good, he's saying. Well, this is even better. So what is he talking about? Once again, psychology. Subtle sensuality. Now, this is again where I would say the Abrahamic religions and Buddhism really don't see eye to eye. And that doesn't need to be a problem, unless you need to be right. I don't need for you to agree with my decision to practice Buddhism for me to feel, quote unquote, okay. If you're clinging to your religion, there's nothing I can do about that, right? But this is where it really splits. Subtle sensuality. Oh gosh, so subtle. This is why it's really important that you meditate every day. And if you're telling yourself that you're Buddhist and you're not doing that, then I don't know what to tell you, man. Then you're blowing smoke up your own ass and you're not coachable, so yeah. Again, I'm not for everyone by design. So subtle sensuality. You ever caught yourself? I'm a singer. Yeah. I'll leave you a little something at the end of this episode so that you can listen if you'd like. Why? Why am I going to do that? Because I wanted to kind of use that announcement that I just made as a example of subtle sensuality. So I'm a singer. So if I'm paying attention and I say, hey, I'm a singer, what happens in my body? God, yeah, Yeah, I am. I've been told I'm a good singer. That's cool. I mean, I feel really, I feel both lucky, but also a lot of time and hours, went into, my singing. So, it's all the things, but I can get really attached, right? Oh, I can sing. Or I can go the other way. Oh, I'm a singer. Oh, God. I'm never going to be good enough to, I'm not that kind of singer. I'm not that kind of singer. Do you see how there's self present in both of those? Subtle sensuality. My art, me, my art, my art. I'm an artist. Look, I painted this. Look, I wrote this. Look, I made this. It's so hot. Look. You see how seductive that is? How subtle? You see? Now take a look at the world and see what the subtlety of that mental habit does on a larger scale. Don't lie to yourself. You're right. It can go both ways, but don't pretend that the dust bunnies aren't under the bed. Eh? Artist, my precious, my art, that's clinging. If you still need to cling to your ego, Buddhism is probably not for you. If you still need to cling to that, my art, I'm a painter, I'm a writer, I wrote this, I work in the industry. If you're still really, really, really identified with that, and you're also really, really, really serious about Buddhism, you're going to be very uncomfortable in your life, because you're going to keep having people that are actually really practicing Buddhism that are going to keep fucking with you. Not to exhibit their own ego, but because that's really what we were kind of asked to do, all of us, another voice. So when I say live and let live, people could turn that back around on me. Well, you don't do that, Sarah. Sure I do. I do it in my own house. I don't come into your house. In my own house, I talk about the map that I picked and how much I work on a daily basis so that I don't cling too much to mine. But you think that your pluralism makes you above this all? Then there's clinging to form, this body, my body. Oh God, what's happening to me? Look at me, I'm 53 years old. Holy shit. I'm in menopause. I put on 15 pounds overnight. Got weird hairs growing out of my face that never grew there before. So I'm just kind of watching, how my, I have dark shadows under my eyes. I look at my mother, and it's clearly, I inherited it from her. She's got really dark shadows. And, I've got my mom's kind of jowly chin, where even though, I'm actually, I'm kind of a leaner gal because I have my, my father's lean kind of end of things. I have my mom's kind of jowls, right? So, all of these things. And then, how about we put it on a larger scale? How about we talk about what my last couple posts have been about how I spent half my adult life binging and purging as a mechanism of control in a situation that was unacceptable and that I felt powerless to get out of, and to some degree, depending on when, I wholly was, And so these are all coping mechanisms, right? These are all things that, humans are quite resilient. We develop mechanisms to survive. I can just feel myself very meandery. So I think I'm going to get back on track. Suffice to say that I'll finish up here with just this little section, right? So we can cling to form, right? In this body. My body is dying. My husband's body is dying. How do I know? Because he's a Homo sapien. We're getting older. I see my mom. She's 83. I watch her like a hawk. Make sure that she's okay. I don't live near her. I watch her because her body's breaking down. Not just the body, the mind also can go. And even if it doesn't go, maybe you're one of those tech bros who just wants to plug into something and keep it going forever. And that's the ultimate clinging to form, isn't it? It's also the ultimate form of the next one, clinging to formlessness. And here's where the Hindus and the Buddhists split off. Here's where the tech bros and the Buddhists split off. This idea that you just gotta live forever, don't you? Because you're so fucking important. I mean, it's kind of funny. And I get why Buddhism wouldn't be popular. It certainly doesn't make the Homo sapien the most important thing in the universe. We just don't think that we're that important. And we think we're the most important possibility that a human can experience. How's that for a paradox? The Buddha says that we're phenomena arising. Again, I'm not sure how long that goes on. This is where I'm not a scholar. We're phenomena arising, phenomena arising, phenomena arising, phenomena arising, phenomena arising, contingent upon karma. So we've been this, we've been that, we've been this, we've been that. I've been Puff Daddy. I've been Trump. I've been those 3 and 4 and 5-year-old kids that I saw underneath the bridge on the train the other day when I was heading down to San Diego. That's Buddhism. So yeah, at the end, he leaves it with the best is just that you're not clinging, period. You're not clinging to form, you're not clinging to formlessness, your jhanic realizations, you take a couple tabs of acid, or you go to your Costa Rica fancy retreat and, you know, take your ayahuasca or whatever you're doing. It's not that. Great. So you had an experience. Great. So you had a glimpse. That's beautiful. You got to see what's possible. You got to see what's possible beyond the 10% of the brain that you're using. You're certainly in no position to be talking about it, you and your 10% brain. Nor am I. So how about you just stop clinging? How about that? And me too, right? And so with that, I bid you adieu. I don't know if anybody's listening. If you are, thank you. You know, really, I appreciate it, and I hope you're getting something out of it. And yeah, I wish you well. Whatever your journey, whatever your path, you know. Maybe it's Christianity, maybe it's Catholicism, maybe it's Islam, maybe it's, and again, I don't know enough. You know, I'm not behind all religions. You know, it depends on what they believe, man. I practice discernment. We're going to get to the other rights in Buddhism, right? It's very ethical. But whatever path, you know, you find yourself in, may you be at peace, may you be at ease. And I don't mean may you be happy all the time, never challenged, and missing out on the joy and all the bliss of being in a human form. I mean, may you really know peace. Like, may you not need conditions to be just right for you to be happy. That's what I wish. So take care, and see you next time. Bye.